Hello and happy Sunday. Welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Happy Hour podcast. We are continuing to look at the new season, previewing each of the divisions. I did the NFC West and the AFC West. Now it's time to turn to the North. And today we are kick-starting things with the NFC North. I will be looking at each of the teams in order of their finish from first to last in 2025. And it may be hard to believe, but the team that finished first in the NFC North last year was the Bears, who actually helped complete a worst to first transition there. The Bears finished first in the North, but lost in the NFC divisional game. They were 11-6. Among their losses, DJ Moore was sent to the Buffalo Bills. They lost safeties Nashawn Wright and Jonathan Owens and a fellow wide receiver Olamide Zaccheaus. They did not bring in a lot of pieces. They got Dylan Thieneman at safety in the draft. They brought in Khalif Raymond at wide receiver to provide some depth, somebody who's familiar with Ben Johnson's offense. And they drafted tight end Sam Roush because, of course, they needed another tight end. Just kidding. Fantasy finishes a year ago, Caleb Williams was QB6, which is pretty impressive, and even more impressive when you consider he still has a lot of work to do to become more accurate as a passer. DeAndre Swift was running back 15. Kyle Monangai, the seventh-round rookie, was running back 30. Rome Odunze, wide receiver 41. Luther Burden, wide receiver 48. Both of them had some big moments. Odunze early in the season, then plagued with some injuries. Burden late in the season when he got going. And Colson Loveland was tight end 12. Look, I think this Bears team is still a very good team. I think they've clarified some of the targets by moving on from DJ Moore. They had those three receivers. It was a question of how it was going to mix in. And by the end of the season, you could see Burden and Loveland really growing into their positions. I think they like the idea of Odunze and Burden at wide receiver and Loveland at tight end, kind of fueling that passing game. Another interesting thing to be watching for this season is I think we could see Kyle Monangai take a slight leap. Even though there was a 15-spot difference in fantasy, it really had to do with Swift having more touchdowns. They were only a couple hundred yards apart. And for somebody who was a seventh-round rookie who was kind of finding their footing and working in at the beginning of the season, I think that's a pretty good sign. Swift going into a contract year has in the past sometimes struggled with injuries, so we will see how that goes. I still like the Bears. I think the Bears will still be a playoff contender. Is that true of our next team? Second place team in the NFC North was the Green Bay Packers. They went into the season as kind of prohibitive Super Bowl favorites and really fell off quickly due to injuries and some weird finishes and some constant inefficiency. They finished second. They made the playoffs, but lost in the wild card round. They were only 9-7-1. Among their key losses, wide receiver Rome Odunze went to the Patriots. They traded wide receiver Dontavian Wicks to the Eagles. Malik Willis, the quarterback, left for Miami. They lost running back Emmanuel Wilson, kind of a key cog in that backfield, to Seattle, and they lost linebacker Quay Walker. They did not bring in much. They brought in quarterback Tyrod Taylor to be the new backup, and they picked up Javon Hargrave on the interior defensive line. They also lost their defensive coordinator, who is now the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. Fantasy finishes Jordan Love, QB 15, after some MVP talk to start the season. Brandon Jacobs, running back 13, missed a few games. Christian Watson, wide receiver 46. That's probably about on par with where he's been in his career. Matthew Golden, the rookie, wide receiver 89, was a relative non-factor. Jaden Reed, injured a lot, only finished as wide receiver 115. And Tucker Kraft, tight end 24, but would have been probably tight end 2 or 3 had he not torn his ACL. But that brings us to this year. How is Kraft going to be ready and come back? Micah Parsons, they made a big trade to get him a preeminent pass rusher, was supposed to power that defense. He tore his ACL. He is not tracking to be cleared for football activities until mid-October. So that will set them back this year as well. I think they took a real gamble. Rome Odunze and Dontavian Wicks, two of the more reliable performers in that wide receiver room, and they just kind of moved on from them. So what is that going to mean for this Packers pass offense? Jordan Love was a trendy, could he have some MVP action going into last season? I never totally bought into that, and we saw as the season went along, why that was kind of the case. And they have some off-field questions for Brandon Jacobs. What is that all going to mean as we go into the season? It's not 100% that everything works out and he's there and available every game, and they don't have a lot behind him. The Packers are one of those teams that had high expectations going into last year, actually underperformed last year, but that may still be better than where they end up this year. And I think that is definitely a question, something to be concerned about. So the Packers, an interesting team. They were actually one of if you watch my bold predictions, one of them is that the Packers won't return to the playoffs. And I know some people think that sounds crazy given their roster, but I think this is going to be a weird transitional season. And this is a very tough division. Every team in the North finished above 500 last year. That doesn't leave a lot of room for error. Third place team was the Minnesota Vikings. They had 14 wins in 2024. They dropped to 9-8, but technically third place in 2025. Among their losses, wide receiver Jalen Naylor went to the Raiders, and they lost running back Ty Chandler and Javon Hargrave, who actually moved over to the Packers. Among their additions, they brought in Kyler Murray at quarterback to add some competition. Comes over from the Cardinals, was a former number 1 overall pick. They added wide receiver Javon Jennings to give them some depth there, and they picked up running back Damon Claiborne in the draft. Fantasy finishes, J.J. McCarthy in his first year as a starter was QB 30. Not incredibly impressive. Aaron Jones, running back 41, had some injury issues last year. Jordan Mason came over, thought he could be a big addition, only wide receiver or running back 36. Jordan Jefferson, healthy and available all season, wide receiver 21, which is a real testament to that quarterback position. Jordan Addison, a wide receiver 45. TJ Hawkinson, recovering from injury, finished as tight end 26. So I think for the Vikings, the question is, can they find better stability and production at the quarterback position? Kyler Murray, former number 1 overall pick. He signed a 1-year deal. He's definitely trying to rehab his image. He's trying to rebuild his career, but can he get it done? We've seen Kevin O'Connell be able to work some miracles with guys in the past, but that same ability to work miracles really didn't translate last year with J.J. McCarthy. And early reports in camp are that McCarthy looks like the better passer against Kyler Murray this year. And that would definitely give me a little bit of pause. Does give me a little bit of pause. So what are we to make of all this? That is a good and an interesting question. I think there are a lot of potentials, a lot of things out there. I still like a lot of the pieces for the Vikings, but Kyler Murray, quarterback who has never hit 4,000 yards in a season, is this kind of his breakthrough season? Is he even the starter here? If it's not, do they just kind of have 2 middling options? Again, a very tough division. I think they're going to be in the mix. They won 9 games last year despite all the struggles and issues that they had. I think they're going to be in the mix, but they are not one of my favorites in this division. And that brings us to 4th place, and a shocking 4th place finish from first to worst for the Detroit Lions last year. They had 15 wins in 2024, and with injuries and some tough losses and some bad luck last year, dropped to 9-8 in a record-wise tie with the Vikings, but they lose the tiebreaker and technically are 4th in the NFC North. And every year we get some teams that go from worst to first, and I think there's no trendier pick this year for that to happen than the Detroit Lions. It is a tough division, but the Lions still feel like they are kind of locked in. I think it's going to be them and the Bears battling at the top. Among their losses, David Montgomery, the running back, was sent to the Houston Texans. They lost Khalif Raymond at wide receiver, Kyle Allen at quarterback, DJ Reader at defensive tackle, and Alex Anzalone at linebacker. They brought in Isaiah Pacheco to be kind of that number 2 running back behind Jahmyr Gibbs. They brought in Greg Dortch, an interesting wide receiver 3 guy, and Tyler Conklin to provide depth at tight end. Last year, Jared Goff was quarterback 8, Jahmyr Gibbs was running back 3, Amon-Ra St. Brown was wide receiver 3, Jameson Williams wide receiver 12, and Sam Laporta tight end 27 as he battled some injuries. Look, I like the Lions. I'm not going to to beat around the bush here. I like the Lions last year. I like their core. I like them for fantasy. Goff consistently is very good in this offense, consistently seems to be a good fit for what they're trying to do. I like their two wide receivers and their tight end. I think Greg Dortch gives them some interesting depth along with Isaac Tesla. So they have some options there. I like Jahmyr Gibbs. I like the focus of the backfield being on Jahmyr Gibbs, with Pacheco being a guy you can bring in to kind of be a hammer at times. He provided some decent floor and some decent performances for the Chiefs, but didn't feel like that real lead back. So I like this position and role better. A lot of the question is, how does this line come together? They've put some time into trying to get that offensive line up and going, to get the defense up and going, and for them to be healthier. And I think with that and a few better breaks, I mean, the difference between 9-8 and 12-5 is not huge. Sometimes it's a few plays, a few injuries, a few pieces of luck in a season, and I think they can bounce right back up there. Everyone in the NFC North finished with 9 wins or more, but no one had more than 11 last year. I think it's going to be a very tight and competitive division again. I like the Lions and the Bears to kind of be battling it out at the top. I think the Packers could actually end up the last place team in this division. And I know some people are not on the same page with that. Some people take offense at that. It's not meant to be offensive. It's just a reality that they've struggled with injuries. I don't totally like the directions they went on offense, and they're betting a lot on Watson and Reed and Kraft all being healthy and available all season, Jacobs being healthy and available all season, and Matthew Golden taking a big second-year leap. And that, I admire the faith, I admire the moxie, but I don't currently possess that same amount. And we already know defense, changing coordinators can be a struggle. Not having Micah Parsons for a good chunk of the beginning of the season, that can be a struggle. And if you get behind the 8 ball in the first third of the season, it can be hard to get back into competition, especially when you have a division like this. If you were in the NFC South, maybe the Packers can slide in there, and I might even be a team that I had picked to be competing for first place. But in the NFC North, playing this schedule, I think it's going to be a tough ask. Well, that'll do it for this week where we look at the NFC North. I will be back next week as we talk the AFC North, which is a division that for the first time in more than a decade is undergoing some massive, massive changes. Well, that'll do it for this week. Hope you guys have a wonderful weekend.